What is the intro, Pablo? Hello everyone, my name is Molly. I'm an American living in Paris with my little dog Pablo, and welcome to my atelier. So just like the last podcast, knitting has continued to take over my life. I'm so obsessed, I can't put my knitting down. A big reason for that was, as I mentioned in my last video, I was very sick, I had vertigo, I couldn't really move much, I could not set up my sewing space, which is like my typical craft that I do. So I decided to pick knitting back up after not doing it for many years. I learned when I was a little kid and I loved it as a kid. And now I have big girl money and I can make big girl beautiful garments and accessories. Maybe in future videos we'll get some sewing content, but for now we're sticking to just knitting. So let's get started with the podcast. So let's get into finished objects by talking about what I'm wearing. This is the zipper sweater by Petite Knit. The yarn is pure Gynt and Tynn silk mohair by Sandnes Garn, and it is a beautiful color. The color is called Poppy. They're both in the shade Poppy, and it is warm as hell. First time I've ever said that word that's actually made sense. I was very skeptical about the Tynn silk mohair just because it has quite a large percentage of wool in it. So I was like, it's not really gonna give fuzzy, it's not gonna give cozy and what I typically go for in mohair garments, but I'm really glad that I did it because the wool in the mohair and the wool in the pure Gynt kind of mesh together really beautifully and become fuzzy over time. And I have worn this to death. It's already becoming fuzzier and I haven't had any pilling considering how much I've worn this on dog walks with Pablo. I've worn this to sleep one night when the heating was just not doing what it needed to be doing. So I definitely am now a fan. I'm converted to the Tynn silk mohair game for winter garments specifically. And I definitely see why Petite Knit often suggests this combination because it really is so incredibly warm. I wish I had made this back when I was living in New York when I had longer winters. In Paris, the winters are kind of shorter than what I'm used to, so I'm like very sad to be putting this away when springtime ends, because I think this might even be a little too heavy for spring. That is how warm pure Gynt is. So please keep that in mind if you plan to make any garments with it. So there was a couple of cons. As much as I love this garment, there was a couple of cons that to me are not terrible. They would not deter me from making this again. But the first is that I find Petite Knit patterns in general have a short sleeve for my body. Like, it's not terrible, but I'm the type of person that likes to have my sleeves like up here and like I pull them down when my hands are cold. So I'm very sad that I won't be able to do that as much as I want to, but I think over time maybe it'll stretch. So if I were to do this again, I would lengthen the sleeves, and now I know with Petite Knit patterns, the length of sleeve on a raglan that I like before the ribbing, so I can always just alter it in the future. It's one of those things that you just won't know if you don't knit as many garments as you can. This is just something you kind of learn as you go, as you make garments. It's not something you're gonna know right away. I definitely did not know to modify this pattern or any of the patterns I've made so far. You'll see with a couple other finished objects that I have that this is kind of a running theme. So I'm just trying to, one of the reasons I love doing these podcasts is when I vocalize kind of my opinions on my different garments, I can notice these things. So going forward, I will always be kind of being more mindful of the sleeve length because I guess I just have like abnormally long arms. Because it's not just Petite Knit patterns, I've made most of her garment, most of my handmade garments are from her, but so I'm not blaming her or her patterns at all. I think I just have abnormally long arms, which I have been told before. Pablo, what are you doing, puppy? So that is the first finished object of 2025 and of this video. I'm really pleased with it. I plan to wear this into the ground. You're gonna play with that toy right now. And also, if I were to make this again, I would probably consider doing the zipper sweater light in a more Paris appropriate yarn. I love this yarn, but I think it's just a little bit too warm for me and where I live right now. It's gonna be great for when I visit New York. Just something for you to keep in mind. So the next finished object that was actually a whip in the last video are these mittens by Gregoria Fibers. This is part of the Cami set. There's like a matching beret that goes with these beautiful ribbed mittens. I did not make the beret because I live in Paris and I don't want to get bullied more than I already do. So I decided to just make the mittens. I really wanted a ribbed mitten. I had some leftover yarn from a Monday sweater that I went to my local yarn store and I exchanged it for a different color in this like beautiful dark brown. I used the Lang Yarns Baby Alpaca with the Mohair Luxe. They have a really beautiful mohair. It's very fuzzy. It's kind of like what I thought mohair was always intended to be. I've since kind of like, this is what you think of when you think of like a mohair mitten. It's incredibly fuzzy. And the baby alpaca is so soft. So these were knit in Lang Yarn's Baby Alpaca and their Mohair Luxe, which are really beautiful yarns. They're very soft and extremely fuzzy, which I love that texture, as I kind of mentioned. We love a super fuzzy texture in this home, so I obviously had to do something with the spare yarn that I had left over. It's a small apartment. I actually exchanged some yarn that I had left over from my Monday sweater that I made in the last video, and I went to my local yarn store and exchanged them for like a dark brown. It's a beautiful mitten. It's quite long on the cuff, which I think is really nice, especially when you're wearing coats so that they kind of like hang over the top and it's very warm and nice. However, I think this was just the wrong yarn choice because they're quite floppy. They don't have structure in the way that like maybe if I'd used the yarn combo from the zipper sweater, I would have gotten more of the texture that I wanted. So while they're incredibly soft and warm, they don't stay on the hands too much because they just kind of like flop and can like fall off my hand pretty easily. So I have worn these when riding a bike and they kind of like slide off my hands when I'm doing that as well. So I don't know, they're beautiful, but I definitely chose the wrong yarn combination for this pattern. I would absolutely make this again in a more kind of structured wool. And also my gauge was a little bit off. I accidentally used a 4mm needle when I should have used a 3.5. So I wouldn't call it a fail. I would call this a teachable moment, especially because I was experimenting with different tensioning techniques, which is not something you should do when you're making a garment in pairs. So one of my mittens is quite a bit shorter, even though it's the same amount of rows. And the tensioning technique that I use here was continental combination because I purl quite loosely, whereas here I knit English style and you can kind of see that it's wider. And this is so much more even. I have a photo on Instagram that illustrates this a lot better. I've since been using the continental combination technique a lot, and it helps me a bit with pain in terms of like long purl rows. I still get quite a bit of hand pain when I do long purl rows, but it does help make it not so bad. But I still think it's a winter staple, and I have worn these a lot with my next finished object that we're going to talk about. So we know her, we love her. This is the Sophie hood, also by Petite Knit, and I used the alpaca wool from San Nisgarn in the color brown, and it is probably the most useful thing I've ever made. It's incredibly nice to not have to bring a hat as well as a scarf and gloves and you know, all of these layers. It's one less thing to kind of carry around, and I can just throw it on when my dog needs to go on a walk. So the pattern actually calls for 5mm needles, and this is the suggested yarn among a couple of other yarns. And I actually decided to knit on a 4.5 needle because when I started knitting on the 5mm needles, I got to about here, and I just found it too open and gapey. I don't know, I just didn't like the way it looked, so I decided to size down, thinking it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Oh my god, rookie mistake. I basically knit double the amount of rows in order to achieve the dimensions in the pattern, because once I achieved the stitch count where you start shaping for the hood, I realized, oh, I'm like nowhere near the size that I need to be. And thank God she put the dimensions in the pattern, because otherwise I don't know what I would be doing. I bought 5 skeins of yarn, and by the time I got to the targeted stitch count, I think I'd only finished 1 bulb. So there are dimensions in the pattern, so you can just kind of freeform it. And I didn't make any modifications to the hood, so you can see it's a little bit on the shorter side compared to some photos on Instagram. It's a much deeper hood on the larger needles, but I actually don't mind. I think it suits me really well. I love to just throw it on. It's great for when I'm riding bikes and my ears don't get cold. Feels a little bit retro. And also with it being garter stitch, it's nice that it's reversible. You can't really see the wrong side, or there's no visible wrong side, which I really enjoy. And garter stitch does stretch quite a lot, but you can block it pretty easily back into place. So not that I have, but I might do that before I put it away for the summer. But yeah, this has probably been my most worn thing, considering I finished it relatively quickly into the new year. And I hope to make another one next year, a shorter one, maybe in a bright color, maybe with some mohair as well. Stop eating the carpet. Okay, breathe. For my final finished object, I have a very exciting pattern here. It's not a petite knit pattern. I'm trying to branch out. I'll get more on that later. But it's my first color work project. And this is the Badger and Bloom sweater by Ventzel. And it is a pretty beginner-friendly color work yoke. because you're never working more than one stitch in one color. So you're always alternating between white and black. There's short rows that are done after the yoke so that you get nice shaping. And the short rows around the color work, actually, I don't know if you can see, but there's kind of like this bump here. It allows the yoke to lay flat against the body, which is something I was very concerned about when looking for a pattern like this. So I think the shaping and the color work are so beautiful. It's such a cool design by Ventzel. I actually found the yarn for this in a kit. So Biches and Buches, they partner, I believe, with Isager and a couple of other yarn brands to sell kits. And they had a kit with the Isager soft yarn, which is a cotton chain knit yarn that has alpaca blown through it. So there's actually no wool in this sweater at all. It is so lightweight. It's actually quite thin as well for something like this. And it's so nice to wear. I mean, it feels like I'm wearing just like a thick t-shirt. Not even, like a lightweight long sleeve t-shirt. That's what this feels like. But it's incredibly warm. The colors that I used are E4S and E0S, and I will link the kit in the description below. I love that it's a minimal interpretation of color work without feeling Christmassy, so I feel like I can wear this after Christmas and throughout the winter, and maybe even a bit of spring without it feeling too seasonal. And like I said, it's a very beginner-friendly color work pattern, and it creates this beautiful inside. You don't have to worry about catching floats or anything because you're never knitting more than one stitch in one color, which is nice. As a person who's new to color work, I didn't have to worry about catching my floats or anything. The format of the pattern is interesting because you have a couple of charts on one page, but the instructions will tell you, okay, chart A, complete chart A, then do this round of increases, and then go back to the chart, etc., etc. So there's no like increases or anything on the chart, so you do kind of have to go back and forth. So if you like to only knit through charts, I don't recommend this pattern. Oh, and one more note on the yarn. I find that this like fuzzy yarn sticks to each other, so it can make the color work a little bit difficult, but it's absolutely worth it for the fabric that it creates. And like I said, this was my first color work project. So, what are you chewing? The yarns can stick together a little bit when you're doing the color work, but it's nothing too bad. It's nothing that would deter me from using this yarn again, especially with the fabric that it creates and how it feels when I wear it. If I were to knit this again, I would make the sleeves a bit longer and maybe the body a bit longer too. I don't know what went wrong there, to be honest. My next work in progress is the Amy sweater by Petiteknit. It's a beautiful oversized raglan cardigan with a 2x2 really high collar, as well as a 2x2 hem and cuffs on the sleeves, which I've just started on this sleeve doing the ribbing. It's quite a long ribbing, so it'll take a while. I'm absolutely devastated that I won't be able to immediately wear this when I'm finished because I think the weather's just gonna warm up by the time I do. But it's so beautiful. I decided to use the suggested yarn and color that she uses in the sample, which is pure Gynt Matcha. There's no mohair in the sweater. I know this yarn is quite sensitive for some people. I can handle it fine. So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer to choose this color because it is so beautiful. I think it suits my skin tone really well. It's a perfect like autumny green without being too dark. And I am knitting this on 4.5mm needles. I actually went up a size to achieve gauge. I don't know what happened there. I think my hands were just cramping or something at the time. They still kind of are. I'm taking a bit of a break. For some reason I did not get gauge on the suggested needles. I usually do with Petiteknit, but not this time. And I don't really have any negatives to say about it. I've learned from my other projects to make my sleeves a bit longer. I've chosen the right size for myself. I've tried this on. I'm really happy with how it looks. I love all of the small details, like the purl row along the collar and this like rolled edge that is on all of the hems, including the collar, sleeves, and the bottom hem of the sweater. And I love it so much. I'm just so devastated I won't be able to wear it right away. So beautiful though. So the next work in progress is the Cardigan Soul by MochiKnits. It does not look like much now. Cardigans rarely do until you have a button band and kind of everything on them. This beautiful sort of collar in a twisted rib as well as button bands in twisted rib. It actually also has this sleeve pleat detail, and that reminded me so much of the Babaa cardigans that I really wanted to make. The only problem was that the yarns that I chose did not really meet the gauge requirements. It happens sometimes. The yarns I ended up choosing are Rerum, Natura, Gilliat, and Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair. This is in the color Cocoa and this is in the color Chocolate. And I kind of just picked these up on a whim because my local yarn store, Little Weasel here in Paris, posted on Instagram that they started carrying Knitting for Olive. and I thought I could maybe use the heavy merino and the mohair to achieve gauge. They ended up not having any heavy merino in any colors that matched this. And then I realized they had this, and I knew that this was a very popular brand. I didn't realize it was a France-based yarn company. So it's actually a much better deal to get something that is a French brand. So I decided to get these two together and knit them up. But like I said, the gauge did not really match. So I ended up doing a lot of math. And I found that if I knit the size 2XL, I could achieve a size medium, which was the size I was going for. So far, I have found that that has been accurate. Thank God. It does not look like much right now. It does not look like much right now. I have done the yoke, the front and left shoulders, and it's kind of rolling so you can't tell really, but I think it's gonna give me exactly the size that I want. I'm really pleased because I was happy with the fabric that I was getting on this 5mm needle instead of on the 6, which is the suggested needle size. I wanted a denser fabric that was not so drapey like the Babaa cardigans kind of seem to be, so I'm really happy with how this is looking. I'm so excited about this. Oh, and I can't believe I almost forgot. I have decided to steek this as well. So I've added my steek stitches here in the center. I've only just started, so it's kind of looking low. And I used some old swatches to practice steeking with a crochet reinforcement. I will probably do some felting as well because I'm really scared, but I think it's going to work out really well. And I actually can't believe how effective steeking is. Like, I really tried to pull apart that crochet reinforcement, but it was just not happening. Like, it's actually very secure, which makes me feel a little bit better. I mean, I'm still terrified, but I feel better. A couple of details about this pattern that I'd like to mention are these short rows. These type of short rows, I'm not sure what they're called, but I'm obsessed with them. These short rows are done by casting on the total amount of stitches for the final back yoke, and then you cut your yarn, you reattach towards the middle, and then you kind of go back and forth, slowly adding stitches until all of the stitches have been incorporated into your working yarn. So then once you pick up stitches, it creates this really beautiful kind of continuous stitch line. And it looks so professional, and the seam on the inside as well looks so nice. I love when patterns do that. I maybe should modify patterns more to use that type of short row technique instead of what they suggest you use, but either way, this is probably the project that I'm the most excited about. So here's one of the steek swatches that I had talked about. I actually cut it twice. I don't remember which side goes where. So I did a couple of tries. This is some like old Let Lopey that I had in my stash, and you can kind of see on the back side I figured out that by doing more steeking stitches, I get a more beautiful finish on the inside. And even though this is like a rustic yarn and it does stick together, I've tried this with other yarns too, and it really does not, like, it might come apart, but even if it does, it's still gonna go kind of fold inwards and create this beautiful edge for you to pick up stitches. We're fearing less in 2025 about steeking. So the next whip that I want to talk to you about actually starts off with a whip fail. So I casted on the Petal Drop Socks handmade by Florence, and it's such a beautiful lace pattern. It's lace, so you kind of have to pull it apart to really see the final look. You silly boy. Pablo definitely made my cast on stitches too tight. Pablo! So I made a lot of mistakes with this sock. I made my cast on way too tight so it can barely go over my foot. When it does go over my foot, it's clearly the wrong size. I think this is like 58 stitches when I need more like 60, 64. So I decided once I started getting towards the end of the foot, I thought, okay, it's gonna bother me. I'm not gonna wear them. Let's just frog it and start a new project. And while I was knitting this, before I decided to frog it, I was very much dreading doing the second one. I was like, I don't want to do this again. This is so boring. It's gonna be so boring. And like any human being, YouTube heard my thought and suggested a video from Wool Needle's Hands where she talks about how she knits her socks 2 at a time. So I found a tutorial from Pearl Soho, and I decided to give that a shot with some other sock yarn that I have, and I have done a pretty good job. These are just vanilla socks this time. I decided to just start simple. I fixed my issue with the stitch count as well as having a stretchy cast on. I still have quite a bit of laddering. I'm still working on that. I'm able to do them together on one set of Chiaogu needles. These are 2.25, and this is the Isager sock yarn in the color red. And I have to say, knitting socks now is a lot more enjoyable, and I look forward to it now. There are a couple pros and cons where the pros outweigh the cons for me, and that is that the socks are identical and I don't have to cast on a second one, and that's enough for me. Like, yeah, it's a bit fussy having 2 balls of yarn, but If you pull from the middle, it's easy. And worth the pain of the first couple of rounds. So I've actually been able to try these on. They're a lot more comfortable. It's quite a long cuff. I'm not sure if I'll do this length of a cuff again. It's a heel flap and gusset. The pattern is the the pattern is the So Basic Socks by Summer Lee, and I really recommend that pattern. It's free and it's basically a master class in like how to knit a basic sock. So I'm really pleased with this, and I'm like now have very much caught the bug for sock knitting, especially going into spring and summer. So I thought I could make more socks during this time period until I make a decision, or I can just keep making fall winter garments and in addition to socks. So I'm really pleased with them. I mean, I've made a mistake here and there, but I don't think it's too noticeable. When I'm done, I will have 2 finished socks. This next work in progress is another petite knit pattern that I've made before, and it is the Monday sweater. It does not look like much yet, but this is the Monday sweater by Petite Knit. I'm making the size medium this time. Last time I made a size XL. I did not know Petite Knit put positive ease in her patterns for every size, so I ended up with a giant sweater that I actually really love. It's very sweatshirty, but this time I'm making the right size in this beautiful steely blue color. It was my first sweater pattern. I love it so much, and I want one in every color. I think brown and red are the ones that I will make after this one. So let me talk your ear off about the yarn that I'm using because it's incredibly exciting. Uh-oh, someone has their tennis ball. So this is the Boucle fingering weight wool. So they're a very special small business here in France. It's run by a family, I believe. They treat their animals really well. It's a very long-lasting wool, and they have beautiful kind of trendy colors like this steel blue color. So I went to the yarn store one day on a complete whim. I went there just to buy needles, and I left with 3 skeins of this. This is 400 meters, and it cost me about 14 euros. So in my opinion, very affordable for such a high quality yarn. And this is the color Fleur de Lin. The reason I chose this color, my store only had a small selection of colors, so I picked one where I knew I had a lace weight to hold it with. One that has been burning a hole in my stash. So imagine my surprise when I come home and they're a perfect match. I really hope to use this yarn more. I want to kind of experiment with different lace weights, and I think there will be a few more Monday sweaters coming from this yarn. I love supporting a business that is local to me and that is known for having a really sustainable and ethical business model. This is really beautiful, and this is the Fiber Space Cumulus, and this is the color Water. So I know I just said that the last whip was special, but like this one is too. They're all special, okay? But this one's special. Just trust me. So this next whip is a second attempt at the Maggie cardigan pattern by Petite Knit, and this is special because I am using the Cashmere Premium by Lang Yarns. This was a gift from myself to myself for my 30th birthday. I decided to choose this pattern because I thought it could be worn in many seasons, especially because cashmere is so breathable and lightweight. It also has this beautiful set-in sleeve contiguous construction that I'm a huge fan of. I have 2 moods, and that is raglan and set-in sleeve. This is definitely fitting the other mood. I think the rest of these are mostly raglans, but so this is definitely the first set-in sleeve I'm ever doing, but a construction I'm a big fan of and really happy with. And this is my second attempt at doing this, and I've made it past where I failed last time. I just made too many mistakes and I had to frog it back and let it sit somewhere in a corner for a few months before I could touch it again. But I'm so glad that I picked it back up because it is on tiny needles. It's on 3.5 millimeter. I know it's going to be beautiful, but I needed a bit of a break. But I can't wait to see the final object. I think it's going to be so stunning and so soft, and I have to think about buttons at some point in the future. And I think you're seeing a theme with the colors here. I'm very happy to have like all these beautiful yarns at my disposal. Little 9-year-old me is so impressed by this yarn stash. She's very happy, she's very excited. Whew. That was a lot of whips. It was a lot of whips, Pablo. What am I gonna do? I have so much to do. I have so much knitting to do. But thanks to the French administration, I will not be able to work for a few months, so I'll have plenty to do. What are you eating? Can I have whatever that is? Thank you. Gross. Think you're gonna join me for this section? Great. So let's get into acquisitions and let's see if we can do this without him trying to eat them all. So the first one is so exciting and so expensive. I picked this up just like it was near the register when I was buying a couple extra skeins of the Gilliat and the soft silk mohair in that brown color. I saw this by the register and I absolutely had to have it because I've been looking for this like lightweight kind of speckled yarn. The color is called Vanilla Bean, which I think is perfect, and this is their merino super sock base. It's so beautiful. And then when I went to pay, I was like, why was that so expensive? That's crazy. This was 30 euros. This will be the most luxurious sock I will ever own, but I'm very happy to have it. It's stop it. But I'm very happy to have it, and I'm very happy to knit it up. It's so stunningly beautiful. I don't know, it was worth it. It's fine. So in terms of patterns to make with this, I have a couple in mind. I want something pretty simple that shows off the speckled design of it. Oh, Pablo, no! So I'm thinking like a classic ribbed sock of some kind for this. I love like a textured funky sock, but I want this color to really shine, so I might just do like a ribbed sock, maybe like a really wide rib sock. Not sure yet, but I'm very excited to wind this up and get started. I know I just said that this yarn is very warm and maybe not suitable to my climate, but it was on sale, so I bought it. I have two colors here in the Sandnes Garn Pure Gynt. This first one is one of the Petite knit colors, and this is in almond tweed. And the second one is just called Black, and this is part of their main collection. It looks like you, look! That's you. So I plan to do a Olga jacket from Petite Knit with a steeking modification in this beautiful cotton. I really hope it works out, but that's kind of what I have planned for this for now. I did say that I like funky socks, so I decided to make a pattern from Stone Knits, who's like the queen of colorwork socks. I'm not sure if I'll knit those two at a time. That might be hard, but I don't know, I'm crazy enough that I might try. So I picked up some Arwetta by Filcolana in a couple of colors. Number 138, which I believe is just called Red, 361, which is Madeira Rose, and then 809, which is Avocado. I only need a couple of grams of these two colors, so I could probably get another pair of socks out of these. I also grabbed a second skein of this one because it's such a beautiful, like, multi-dimensional color. Almost has like a shift to it where it goes like between brown and green. And I've decided to make the itty bitty berry socks by Stone Knits with these colors. And I'm really excited. I think it's gonna be such a fun project. So the last acquisition that I have is another sock yarn. Like I said, I really got the bug, guys. And this is the Lang Yarns Alpaca sock in the color 1062. Beautiful fuzzy creamy color, and it was these were bought separate on separate occasions, but it was a very similar situation where I was like, why was that so expensive? This was 20 euros. Why do I do this to myself? Check the price. Crazy loca. I think that the socks I want to make with this are, I'm not really sure. So there's a particular pattern I have in mind for now, and that is the Augustine's Cable number 2 socks. I believe it's the only sock pattern Augustine's DK has. So I have that in mind. And this, and I think the Filcolana Arwetta as well, they're suggested to be worked on a 2.5mm needle, so like slightly larger than normal socks. And I love this like big chunky skein. So I'm excited to wear these because it's also very, very soft. I'm a big fan of Lang's Alpaca yarns. What a good boy. Look at assistant producer. You're the assistant producer. So I have actually another whip, but I'm not considering it a whip because I might frog it. I don't know how to feel. I have a lot of this Cascade 220 that was an acquisition in last podcast. And the reason I'm so conflicted about it is because it's incredibly beautiful, but I feel like I bit off more than I can chew. This is the diamondarancardigan by Hello Fuga Life. I'm really pleased with how my cables are looking. I think it's really beautiful. I'm just stretching it so you can kind of get an idea of what it will look like when it's blocked. It has this like seed stitch back. I had to steam block the back yoke because it was like slanting. So I have this like scrap yarn down through the center. I might frog it because it takes up a lot of mental energy, and I would love some other knitters' advice. Do you guys have projects like these that you work on monogamously, or do you just like have one that takes a long time that like sits in a special basket? Like, what do you do? Because I'm thinking if I frog it, I can maybe find a simpler cable project that's a bit more manageable. This is a potential setback. I'm not sure what to do. So I guess this is more a cry for help. I guess that's what this section will be called. Those are all of the projects that I wanted to talk about. I feel like I've talked forever. Pablo definitely needs some of my attention now before he goes absolutely insane. But before I do that, I want to share a little bit of inspiration with some patterns that have been inspiring me and other motifs and things like that. So like I said in my last section, I'm really, really interested in cables, but I'm having a hard time finding the right pattern for me. I've never completed a cabled garment or cabled anything other than like starting a project with cables and kind of like abandoning it because it's too hard. But the cable patterns that I have in mind that maybe are a little bit simpler are things like the sweater number 15 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. The Haru sweater by Knits by Summer is incredibly beautiful. I mean, it's a lot of cables, but it's a lot of two, I think, cables. Front Porch sweater by Kevin Haggerty as well is a great option. So I have some white yarn and white mohair that I'm thinking maybe I could do one of those sweaters in. Or even just if I do decide to frog this navy blue cardigan, maybe that's something I could do. Another thing that's really inspiring me is kind of of floral motifs and floral texture. The Joy Socks by Stone Knits comes to mind, as well as the Flower Power Pullover by Pendler Strick, I think. I love that they are, the socks are a colorwork, and I believe the pullover is intarsia. And I love how simple it is, while still adding a level of complexity that kind of like scratches the crafty itch that I have in my brain at all times. I believe this is a real motif that existed somewhere in fashion around the 70s. So I love that kind of vibe, and the colors that both designers chose to make their sample in are in similar patterns. So I would probably do something along those lines as well. Also, going into spring, I'm very excited to wear my mini scarves again. I find them so useful. I know they're not really that popular with a lot of people, but for me personally, I live for a mini scarf. I wish I was wearing one right now. And I've made my Sophie scarves. I might make a few more, but I want to try a couple of other patterns. Sorry Nordland has that beautiful cable one. Is it called a Lalu shawl or something like that? And I think that's a great cable project because it's on the smaller side. And I think smaller cable projects are less daunting, which is why I chose the sock pattern earlier. But I also love the tulip scarf by Mon Mi Choi. It creates a floral texture with the stitches as opposed to like intarsia or colorwork. Along those lines, there's also the Duoro socks by Sarah Blau Design. These are on a slightly larger gauge, I believe, a 3mm, and you have this like scalloped cuff that comes as a result of all the lace work in the cuff. And then the foot and heel of the sock are really simple, so it kind of adds a little bit of extra fun. So that's kind of all I have that's been inspiring me at the moment. My Ravelry favorites are filling up with motifs like this. Please share whatever it is you're working on in the comments, and let me know what motifs and trends in the knitting world that you're really enjoying and that you really want to try. What are you eating? What are you eating? Okay, this little guy needs some attention, so I think we're gonna call it there. Thank you for visiting our atelier, and we'll see you next time. Bye!